The last message I received said, "Let me know if you need anything." That was 8 months ago. I remember staring at my phone that night. Sitting on my couch, the lamp beside me casting a soft yellow glow on the walls of a house that suddenly felt too big for one woman and too quiet for one broken heart. I refreshed my messages again and again, as if doing so might summon a voice, a concern, a reminder that I still existed in the world outside my grief. But nothing came, no vibration, no ringtone, just silence thick, heavy, almost physical. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 35 years old. I live in a modest suburban home in Ohio, the kind with white siding, a small front porch, and flower beds that used to bloom because my husband remembered to water them. People tell me I'm beautiful even now, even after everything, but beauty feels like an irrelevant detail when you're trying to survive a life that no longer makes sense. I'm sitting at home as I tell you this story. I always tell it from here because this is where everything echoes the loudest. The ticking clock in the kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator, the empty space beside me on the couch where my husband used to stretch his legs and complain that I was hogging the blanket. This house remembers him even when people don't. Before my husband died, my phone never stopped ringing either, but back then, it rang for different reasons. Work calls, dinner plans, friends asking us we were free this weekend, group chats filled with jokes, memes, complaints about life, complaints about traffic, complaints about aging. Normal things, ordinary things. The kind of noise you don't appreciate until it disappears. His name was Daniel. Daniel was 40 when he died. He wasn't sick for long, that's the cruelest part. 1 month he was healthy, teasing me for worrying too much, telling me to stop Googling symptoms. The next month, we were sitting in a hospital room, listening to a doctor explain things slowly, carefully, as if the gentleness of his tone might soften the blow of the words aggressive and advance in limited options. I remember thinking, this can't be happening to us. We weren't finished yet, we had plans. We had arguments we hadn't resolved and vacations we hadn't taken and conversations we thought we had time for. We had a future that assumed he would always be there. When Daniel died, the world didn't go quiet right away. In fact, it got louder. The phone rang constantly. Friends, family, coworkers, people I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly remembered my name. There were casseroles on the porch, flowers arriving every day, cards filled with handwriting that blurred together as I cried over each one. Hugs that lingered too long, voices saying, "You're so strong," even when I felt like I might shatter if someone touched me again. The funeral was crowded. I remember standing at the front of the room, dressed in black, my hands trembling, my eyes swollen, watching people line up to tell me how sorry they were. Some cried harder than I did. Some shared stories about Daniel that made me smile and ache at the same time. Some told me to call anytime, day or night. Some promised they would check on me. Some said, "You won't go through this alone." I believed them. After the funeral, the noise faded slowly, like a song being turned down, one notch at a time. The first week, people still came by. The second week, messages slowed. By the third week, I noticed that the phone was silent for long stretches of time. Entire afternoons passed without a single notification. Entire evenings where I cooked dinner alone and ate it standing at the counter because setting the table for one felt too depressing. Grief is strange, it doesn't follow a straight line. Some days I woke up feeling almost normal, then felt guilty for it, as if smiling meant I was betraying Daniel. Other days I couldn't get out of bed, staring at the ceiling while the weight of reality pressed down on my chest so hard I thought I might suffocate. And through all of it, my phone sat beside me, silent. At first, I made excuses for people. They're busy. They don't want to bother me. They assume someone else is checking in. But as days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, I had to face a truth that no one prepares you for. Support has an expiration date. People don't abandon you because they're cruel. They drift away because your grief makes them uncomfortable. Because they don't know what to say anymore. Because your pain reminds them of their own fragile lives. Because the world keeps moving. And you are standing still, frozen in the moment everything broke. I remember the first time I realized how alone I really was. It was a Sunday afternoon, rain tapped awfully against the windows. I had spent the entire morning cleaning the house not because it was dirty, but because I needed something to do with my hands. I found one of Daniel's old t-shirts folded in the laundry basket. I pressed it to my face before I even realized what I was doing. It still assumed his shape, it still smelled faintly like him. I sank down onto the floor and cried until my chest hurt. When I finally looked at my phone, hours had passed. No missed calls. No messages. No just checking in. That was the moment something inside me shifted. Grief teaches you lessons you never asked for. One of them is this: people love you loudly at first, then quietly forget you are still hurting. I stopped initiating conversations after a while. I wanted to see if anyone would notice. If anyone would reach out without being prompted. If anyone would ask how I was really doing, not the polite version. Not the socially acceptable answer, but the truth. Most didn't. When I did see people, they seemed relieved when I said, "I'm okay," even when I wasn't. Especially when I wasn't. Saying I'm okay made them comfortable. Saying I'm not made them fidget. Glance at their phones, change the subject. So I learned to lie. I learned to smile when people told me I was young and would find love again. I learned to nod when they said Daniel would want me to be happy. I learned to swallow my anger when they talked about moving on as if it were a switch I could flip. At home alone, I let myself feel everything I wasn't allowed to feel in public. The loneliness was the worst at night. Daniel used to fall asleep before me. His breathing slow and steady. His hand reaching for mine even in sleep. Now the bed felt like an ocean wide. Cold, endless. I slept on my side of the mattress for months. As if crossing into his space would erase him somehow. Sometimes I scrolled through my contacts at midnight. Hovering over names, wondering who I could call without feeling like a burden. Most nights I called no one. I started talking out loud to the house instead. I told the walls about my day. I complained about work. I asked Daniel questions I knew would never be answered. I laughed at memories, then cried because laughter felt wrong without him. The world expects grief to be tidy. It expects stares at the funeral. Sadness for a while, then quiet resilience. It does not know what to do with a woman who is still broken months later. Still lonely, still waiting for the phone to ring. I am beautiful, people say, as if beauty could protect you from abandonment. As if it could replace the warmth of a familiar voice asking, "Did you eat today?" There were moments I felt invisible. I would go to the grocery store and see couples arguing over cereal brands, and envy them for having someone to argue with. I would see elderly women walking slowly with their husbands and wonder if that future had been stolen from me. I would watch friends post pictures of their happy families and feel like a ghost haunting a life I no longer belong to. And still the phone stayed silent. One evening, I finally broke. I called a friend, someone who had promised, with tears in her eyes at the funeral, that she would always be there. The call rang and rang before going to voicemail. I didn't leave a message, I didn't try again. That night I realized something important: grief isolates you not because you push people away, but because the world doesn't know how to sit with pain that has no expiration date. I stopped waiting for the phone to ring after that. Not because I didn't want it to, but because waiting hurt too much. Instead, I learned to survive in smaller ways. I learned to cook for one without crying every time I set the table. I learned to sleep with the TV on, just to hear another human voice. I learned to take walks in the evening and breathe deeply when memories ambush me. Some days I still scroll through old messages from the weeks after Daniel died. The promises, the offers, the love that arrived like a flood and disappeared just as quickly. I don't resent those people anymore. I understand now. They weren't abandoning me, they were returning to their lives. And I was still standing at the edge of mine, trying to figure out how to live it alone. Grief doesn't end, it changes shape. It becomes quieter but heavier in some ways, less dramatic, more permanent. If you're listening to this and you've ever wondered why someone stopped calling after your worst day, this is why. Not because you weren't loved, but because society teaches us how to show up for tragedy, not for the long, lonely aftermath. I'm still here. Still in this house. Still beautiful. Maybe, but more importantly, still breathing, still learning, still finding small reasons to keep going. And sometimes, very rarely, the phone does ring. When it does, I answer with gratitude. Not because I expect anything anymore, but because I know now how precious it is when someone remembers that grief doesn't end when the funeral does. If you know someone who has lost someone, call them. Even months later, even when you don't know what to say, silence is heavier than you think. And somewhere in a quiet house like mine, someone is still listening for a ringtone that may never come.